The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Japan's political stage has been shaken once again. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, who took office just last October, has announced his resignation. His departure follows a string of election defeats that have left the ruling Liberal Democratic Party weaker than at any point in recent memory. Was Mr. Ishiba's resignation inevitable? And who could replace Ishiba as Japan's next prime minister? Well, joining us today to share more is Stephen Nagy, who is the professor of politics and International Studies at the International Christian University. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Stephen, Prime Minister Ishiba's resignation came after weeks of, speculation and repeated election losses. Some argue he clung on too long, while others feel he left too abruptly. But, Mr. Ishiba framed his resignation as coming at the appropriate time. So was this timing strategic?
So I do think it came at the appropriate time. Of course, he could have resigned earlier, immediately after the election, but there were those sensitive negotiations between the United States and Japan in terms of where they're going to head in terms of tariffs. There was also the August 5th and August 8th Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemorative events of the first and second atomic bomb droppings, and of course the end of World War II commemorative events in which I think the Japanese were very reticent to have a power change and inculcate instability into all their international relations with all these different sensitive periods, happening at around the same time. So I think it came at the right time, but, probably could have came earlier, back in January or February, to be frank.
Okay. Some analysts, though, argue Ishiba was always an outsider within the LDP, lacking a strong factional base. How decisive was that outsider status in his downfall?
So I do think he was always seen as an outlier. He tried to be the prime minister 5 times, and he succeeded on the 5th time. At the very last minute, when the former prime minister, Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, put his weight behind his candidacy to be LDP president and eventually prime minister. But I don't think it was just factional politics. In reality, I think the U.S.-Japan relationship under his tenure didn't move in the right direction. I think the tariffs went in the wrong direction. And in general, we saw some unbalancing of this most important and critical relationship for Japan. And on the China front, the relationship from the conservative standpoint in Japan was too close, was too friendly in many different areas, not recognizing some of the challenges. And I think those challenges really, came to the forefront on September 3rd with the great parade in Tiananmen. And I think that this was all, not in line with, I think, the consensus of foreign policy and where Japan should be heading in terms of its most important relationships. That's with the United States and China, established under the late Prime Minister Shinzo.
Did months of fraught tariff negotiations with U.S. President Donald Trump's administration play a big part in Mr. Ishiba stepping down as well?
No, I think that this is part of, again, a larger failure or poor stewardship by Prime Minister Ishiba. Again, he's seen as likable. The public liked him. But over the past year, I think he's seen as mismanaged the most important relationship. That's with the United States and Mr. President Trump at this particular time, but not making any significant progresses on the important issues facing Japan. They have an existential demographic problem. The number of elderly is increasing day by day, and the number of young people is not there, and he hasn't been able to budge that whatsoever. Gender inequality is also a huge problem in Japan. And not to mention, I think, inflation and the general prospects of the Japanese economy really hasn't turned around or moved in the right direction under his tenure. And I think with all this, plus the corruption within the LDP, has really pushed the party to say we need a new leader and we need to push Japan in a different direction.
At the same time, opinion polls in August suggested more Japanese wanted Mr. Ishiba to stay. So how is the Japanese public reacting to Mr. Ishiba's resignation then? Why do you think there was such a disconnect between public sentiment and LDP's stance?
So I think this is a really great question because, in the election itself, we saw San Seito Party, which is, a right-of-center party that had harder views on migration policies, harder views on, I think, trying to promote women to have babies where they basically stay at home and get paid to have children. These were seen as, I think, conservative policies that are not aligned with the majority of Japanese people. Second, I think the prospects of who's going to be the new leader in Japan was worrisome for centrists voters in Japan. They see the potential of Takichi Sanae prime ministership as moving backwards on social issues. She doesn't support, for example, having separate names when you get married or same-sex marriage. These are relatively conservative positions within the Japanese context, but these are not the positions that I think many people in the big urban area support. So a lot of people saw Mr. Ishiba as, if you can be liberal in Japan, and I say that with a bit of humor, he was seen as less conservative compared to the people that will potentially replace him as prime minister.
Well, I mean, during his short tenure here, Mr. Ishiba did push for reforms on minimum wage and low-income support. So has Mr. Ishiba managed to achieve any credible outcomes, though?
This is the challenge. In American dollars, he's been able to push up minimum wage 25%. But, that's not a lot of money in the Japanese context. Still, the average Japanese that is in making minimum wage is making about 1,100, 1,200 Japanese yen. And with the cost of inflation, it really isn't, it's hard for those people on those wages. He did put forward some subsidies to decrease the price of rice when there were some rice shortages this summer. I think that was relatively popular, and he did install young Koizumi Shinichiro as the Minister of Agriculture to deal with some of these crises. So I think those are positive. On the foreign affairs side, very, very positive relations with India, and just welcomed Prime Minister Modi. And the South Korea-Japan relationship has also moved in a positive direction. And I think for many people like myself that look at security relations, we're surprised by the continuity in positive relations between Seoul and Tokyo. So there are some bright spots, and there are some problems, and I think the problems really overwhelmed the bright spots, and that's why he lost his job.
Right. I mean, with Mr. Ishiba announcing his resignation, though, attention turns to who will next steer the world's fourth largest economy. LDP lawmakers are scheduled to vote later today whether to hold an extraordinary leadership election. I mean, much of the chatter now is around Sane Takaichi and Shinjiro Koizumi. Are they the frontrunners to replace Mr. Ishiba, Stephen? I mean, who else might be in the spotlight?
So let's go into the pauses. I think there's the current Minister of Economic Security, Mr. Kobayashi, outstanding, competent, but a bit too young. And in the Japanese context, youth is not an asset like in the modeling world or in movies. Minister Hayashi, who used to be the foreign minister, now is the cabinet secretary. Again, very competent, speaks English well, experience on the international front, but he's seen as too friendly to China. Mr. Motegi, who has been one of the, I think, integral people within the party, again, is competent but seen as somewhat unpopular amongst the bureaucrats and within the party. So that leaves us with Mr. Koizumi and Takaichi. Now, the challenge with Mr. Koizumi is he's young. He's under 50, and this is a problem within an ageist society like Japan. And I use the example with the foreign minister, Makiko Tanaka, who was the daughter of probably one of the most influential prime ministers, Prime Minister Tanaka Kakure, the person responsible for normalizing relations with China back in 1972. If she couldn't make, the senior leadership within the LDP budge and shift some of their positions, I find it really unlikely that, Mr. Koizumi will be able to have real influence with the senior leadership within the LDP. So that leaves us lastly with Takaichi Sanae, who was endorsed by the former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. She's had those important positions within the LDP, such as the chairperson of the Policy Council. And that gives her experience working with the factions. And she also has conservative positions, which I think the party is in general in favor of right now. So, that's who's on the list. And I think we may see our first female prime minister in Japan.
Right. I mean, as you said, if Miss Takaichi is chosen, she would be Japan's first female prime minister. So, Stephen, how much of a breakthrough would this be symbolically?
I think it's mixed because, like I said, she has very conservative positions on, people getting married and having to take on the name of the husband and on same-sex marriage, but on things like security, on fiscal discipline, on the conservative principles that have made up the LDP over the past 80 years. She is, a flag bearer, and in that sense, I think she'll be seen as, the first woman that became prime minister that has been able to break through the male-dominated LDP, and she is the inheritor of, again, the consensus of foreign and domestic policy that was carved out by the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And in that sense, I think it's a very positive message for Japan and for in particular women in Japan that they can break the glass ceiling. The question is will she have longevity? Will she stay in power long enough to have a positive impact? Because if she fails, they'll blame her for failing because she's a woman. And that we've seen that happen before with Hillary Clinton and other female leaders around the world.
Right. Well, given that the LDP lost its majority in both houses under Ishiba, how much uncertainty is there on whether their new party leader will automatically become prime minister?
Well, it's pretty much certain. What happens once they have the election for the president of the LDP, they will soon hold a general election to, basically have the public accept that, the new party leader is the new country leader. That is the tradition. That's what Japan has done in the post-World War II period. I don't expect anything different. So if the LDP election is held August 9th, I believe, or October 9th, I believe, that means that the election would be sometime in November, and then they would coronate the prime minister officially as being elected by the people of Japan. So it's a straight line from LDP president to prime minister. The question is how long that new prime minister is going to last, or are we going to see revolving leadership like we see on train sushi when we go to the train sushi shops here in Japan and other parts of the world? And that's a big worry.
Definitely. I mean, with that said, could this open the door for opposition parties to gain more influence in Japanese politics?
So I do think there's some opportunity, but the LDP is very good at attaching themselves to popular issues of the minority parties and bringing them into the LDP. So I do expect a harder line on migration and tourism, something that the Sanseito has been promoting in their campaigns. Tamaki, the head of the future-oriented party, Mirai Noto, he has promoted a lot of AI solutions, technology solutions to deal with Japanese challenges. And I think some of these may be brought into the LDP to gain supporters. But ultimately, I think it will be going back to first principles of conservative policy, strengthening relations with the United States, having a healthy distance from China, but continue to engage with China because there's no future Japanese economy without the Chinese economy, and that's the same where you're based in Singapore and most of Southeast Asia and most of the region. So those, first principles is where I expect the new leader to come back, but they'll adopt the policies of the minority parties to get their support for pushing Japan in a more positive direction.
I mean, Ishiba has emphasized the importance of continuity, especially in executing the trade deal with the U.S. and even addressing the wage growth and living costs for its citizens. So before we let you go here, Stephen, what challenges might Ishiba's successor face next, and what lessons does Ishiba's resignation hold for his successor?
So on the domestic front, this is going to be with Japan for the next 30, 40, 50 years. It's how to deal with demographics, gender inequality, productivity issues, rising prices while wages are not increasing. These are very, very serious. And, over the past 30 years, the average Tanaka and Suzuki has become poorer, not richer. On the international front, I think we saw it. President Xi, President Putin, and Secretary General Kim Jong-un standing at the gates of Tiananmen Square, presiding over a massive military parade. And, they have committed interest in reshaping international society, redefining rule of law, redefining democracy, and weakening international institutions. And I think Japan's in the forefront and how Japan manages this and balances its relations with the U.S., building strong relations with ASEAN and India and Europe are going to be key challenges for any leader in Japan. And that's going to be an enduring challenge that they're going to continue to invest in because they want to make sure that they have the maximum strategic autonomy, just like countries like Singapore.
Some great insights from you there. Thanks so much, Stephen, for joining me today.
It's great. Thanks very much for having me. I look forward to talking again.
Thank you. That was Stephen Nagy, who is a professor of politics and international studies at the International Christian University. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.